Having settled permanently in the UK, it was while at Birkbeck College in London that Bohm formed one of the most enduring science partnerships of his life with physicist Basil Hiley. And he also had an unexpected and welcome encounter with a forgotten theory, and that encounter changed everything.
When I first joined David Bohm, we didn't talk about his hidden variable 52 paper. What we were talking about was how could we get quantum mechanics and gravity, general relativity, into one theory? How could we quantize the gravitational field? Fortunately, we had Roger Penrose with us at Birkbeck at the time, and David Bohm, Roger Penrose, myself, and some mathematicians used to meet and talk about this problem.
I got to know David Bohm quite well when I was a lecturer at Birkbeck College in London, and Bohm was there at Birkbeck too. And he, Bohm, and Basil Hiley and I used to have get-togethers. But we had many very interesting discussions, and Bohm was somebody who I got a lot from. I always thought that he was very much like a wave function himself, that you'd ask a question, you see, a very specific question, and he would be very focused and give you a deep, very focused answer to that question. And then it would start to spread out, and it would encompass a little more about physics, and it spread out, and then about philology and about human nature and so on. And I'd get a bit lost about what's going on. So I needed another question. I'd ask him another question, and whoop, the conversation would focus itself very deeply on this particular point, and he would give a very succinct answer to that, and then again he would spread out like this. So it's just the way a wave function, as you measure it, is the particle here, and whoop, you see, and then it spreads out again like this.
At that time, David Bohm was developing a new idea which was called structure process, that basically we want to start with process, not particles moving in space-time, but a process from which both particles and space-time can emerge. Very radical ideas. And it was only much later, I think it was almost after 10 years of me working with David, that Chris Dewdney and Chris Philippides came up to me and said, why don't you talk about the 52 paper? And that's when I said, because I think it's wrong. And that's when Chris said to me, Basil, have you read the paper? And I then had to agree that I hadn't.
Basil was giving the impression, well, he didn't think it was, worth pursuing. He hadn't really read the papers. It wasn't what they were doing now. They were doing something, more fundamental. But the more we talked about it, I think the more he realised that there was something. Maybe there's something in this. Maybe something worth doing. And so, Basil went off, read the papers.
And when I went away and I saw it, I thought, well, how on earth can he get trajectories out of this non-commutative structure?
I think it'd be a very valuable thing if we could show clearly how Bohm's 52 theory worked in the two-slit experiment, because obviously the two-slit experiment is the iconic experiment in the interpretation of quantum theory.
And that's what Chris was absolute master at, was actually developing computer programs to actually simulate this, and let's have a look at what is going on here.
In Bohm's hidden variables view, wholeness is present and analyzable, and the evolution of particles is describable in a clear and intuitive way that gives rise to well-defined motions in the real space of our everyday world. What Bohm refers to as the quantum potential, seen here, arises naturally within the quantum domain, giving rise to a force, a process that conditions the energy of a particle so that its internal form responds appropriately. It is in this context that we can say that the quantum potential is informing the particle of its condition and context within the whole. David Bohm and Basil Hiley show how this new interpretation introduces a radical new approach of an unbroken wholeness in the universe that gives rise to a fundamental new quality in quantum physics called non-locality, the profound interconnectedness of the entire physical universe.
So I set about calculating the particle trajectories for this, and Chris Philippides produced the quantum potential picture. And when we put the two together, I mean, we were initially, I think, quite staggered by how amazing this story was, which had never been told in any sort of clear, detailed way.
And there were the trajectories for the two-slit experiment. Chris Dewdney and Chris Philippides produced beautiful. I thought, wow. Then I said, well, what about the quantum potential? Oh yes, we worked that out as well.
You could actually see in the images that we produced exactly how you could have particle trajectories in the two-slit experiment and account for interference, something, of course, which is forbidden in normal quantum theory. And I think that was something that was very amazing to us, you know, that you could actually see how the thing worked exactly. You could follow individual particles as it was affected by this quantum potential through space, and the quantum potential would guide the particles into the bright interference fringes. So it was quite an amazing experience, actually, to see it done and to see how well it worked.
Wherever there was a dip in the quantum potential, that's the rate of change of a potential, which is a force, and the trajectories would jump across the ditch, and when they were on the plateaus, they would just come straight. And the end result was gathering these trajectories, which explained completely the interference pattern.
The films actually have within them a plot of the quantum potential and how this changes with time. And so you see the particles coming in and they meet this quantum potential, and the quantum potential exerts a force on them. You can see how that changes the motion of the particles and allows them through the barrier or reflects them from the barrier. So the quantum potential was there in these pictures.
Now, according to the orthodox theory, that is not possible. There's nothing in the formalism they told us to make that possible. At that stage, when Dave was still alive, he saw these trajectories and these quantum potential, and his eyes actually lit up. Because he had not seen them. He'd written about them, but he had not seen them. And then we started discussing the quantum potential. What could it mean? And this quantum potential energy only functions when quantum phenomena appear. That is, in the particle approaching two slits, it is the quantum potential that organizes the way the individual trajectories work. So there is a dynamic whole process going on in which the quantum potential appears.
When I showed these films, you know, the lights went down and the film was projected, and the impact was often very strong because, you know, sometimes you would hear almost gasps from the audience. How could they be seeing this thing which was forbidden to be done? You know, the board said you can't make pictures of what happens in quantum phenomena, but there they were seeing them, you know, so there was, they had a major impact. In fact, there was a physicist, Franco Sellery, who was particularly supportive of this work once he'd learnt about it. And he referred to these movies as the hard porn of physics, in a sense, because you know, they would be censored by the orthodoxy. You shouldn't be able to see this stuff, and yet here we were projecting it in front of them.
Non-local information does exist, and all aspects of the universe at that level are correlated informationally. But what it also says is the price to pay for that is that we cannot access that domain, it always will be a hidden domain, that non-local domain. This is why it's called hidden variables. It really says that there exists a hidden regime of reality in which everything is interconnected, but no person, even in the future, will be able to access that domain and make and control it. So this is also what the mystical traditions tell us, that we must be humble in front of reality, that there will always be domains of reality that will remain beyond science, beyond the scientific method, will remain beyond access by scientific agents. And if the quantum potential is discovered in this way and non-locality is proven, then the existence of that domain is proven.
Nature must be non-local if it's going to have a hidden variable explanation.
It seems strange to us, and I stress the word seems, but if we want to make sense of a theory, that matters also. And sometimes when a theory seems strange, we get past it, and other times when it seems strange, it's pointing us to something that we haven't understood well enough.
So you can, an event here could be influenced by a distant event, but only if only if a signal could pass there, if some influence could pass between the two. That's locality. Whereas what we're seeing in quantum theory is that we have events and these distant particles which can affect each other with no signal passing between them. There's no signal. So they are, in a sense, in touch with each other. They're affected by each other, but there's no possibility for any signal or any influence to pass between them. So the particle on Andromeda and the particle on Earth are in direct contact somehow, but not through space and time in the usual way. So this non-locality just means, distant events can influence each other without any signal passing between them.
But the point is, remember that everything emerges, the particles emerge out of this background. And this background is the totality. So the emergence doesn't mean that we've got, and from that emergence we get locality and non-locality being side by side. It's very much like the hologram. The interesting thing about the hologram is that if you take an object with all its local relationships, form a hologram of it, the hologram, you can tear it in half, quarters, and so on, and you yet see the whole picture.
So this was a different way of seeing quantum mechanics. So if you want to have a theory which is underlying quantum theory, you have to then connect that to the version of quantum theory which one has with the hidden variables. So you want to see how that arises from some more fundamental theory, and I think that's what really excited Bohm and Hiley. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go beyond this model, which had to be recovered from the deeper model. But I think the real excitement for them was definitely to try and develop this underlying model from which the hidden variables would emerge.
If you're looking at interpretations or ways of looking at quantum mechanics, my view is that probably the Bohm-Hiley way of looking at quantum mechanics has the most satisfactory ontology. So you have a picture of what constitutes reality without changing quantum mechanics.
The ultimate reality is in what he would refer to as the implicate order, in which there aren't any separate objects or things to influence each other. There's more of a wholeness there, which everything is connected. And it's only when we try to talk about individual objects, we explicate them to this explicate order, the order which we observe, that we then see this non-locality. It arises from the fact that we are bringing out of the implicate order these separate structures. But these separate structures aren't independent because ultimately they are part of the implicate order.
Remember, we're talking about wholeness. We have to have wholeness in here. Here we agree with Bohr. Bohr pointed out that it was very important. The new feature that quantum mechanics introduces is a kind of wholeness, which means we cannot analyze things by cutting them up into little bits as we do in classical physics. But what we can do is, if we want to try and cut it up, that the way one bit goes into the next bit actually involves unfolding into the whole and then enfolding back again into a particular region. And so you get this idea of unfolding, enfolding, unfolding, enfolding. So what looks like a continuous trajectory is actually a series of foldings and unfoldings.
I tried to get some idea of what might be the process which was implied by the mathematics of the quantum theory. And this process is what I call enfoldment, that the mathematics itself suggests a movement in which everything, in which any particular element of space may have a field which unfolds into the whole, and the whole folds and enfolds into it, right?
For me, the way that quantum cloud works is that you are the determiner of what you see. This is a mess of, I think that of elements that are both particles and hopefully trajectories that come together, and depending on where your position is, either in a boat or walking along the side of the Thames, and depending on the time of day, you will see or not see the possibility of a body. Yeah, we aren't just things in space, we are places of transformation. And furthermore, our relationship with others, but with all phenomena, is very much a question of our relative positions. And I think that was something else that really deeply affected me about Bohm's work, the participant nature of the observer in the emerging of what we call reality. Visual art has spent most of its time, in terms of its evolution, dealing with pictures of the way things look. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in saying, let's try and discover how things are. And actually, how they look can be extremely superficial. It's simply the accidents of how light happens to hit the skin of something. But actually, I want to go. We know that this is all illusion. Quantum physics invites us to be participators in that emerging of a world. And it has very, very fundamental, I think, both philosophical, spiritual, and political implications, which are essentially that each of us is a co-producer of a world, that each of us is a co-producer of a possible future. My interest in David Bohm, who I kind of came across through an association with both David Peat and Basil Hiley, was this notion that actually there is no determinism, that everything is becoming, everything is in a state of emergence. Because actually the only thing that we can be certain about is the fundamental transformation of energy into matter and matter into energy. I think out of which all of this, in a way, extraordinary realizations, both about the nature of mind but also about the nature of matter, have come. The work of people like Einstein, Bohm, they are like huge windows opening in the imagination to a way of dealing with life and the things we encounter within it freshly, and in a sense with the right level of uncertainty.
David Bohm, was starting to say, well, for people to understand what we're talking about, English has to be able to explain these things so that the ordinary person can understand. So he started to talk about in the English language has to become a lot more process-oriented as opposed to being noun-oriented. And that process-oriented approach to English, he was referring to as the real mode. And that's what he was working on. And when I understood that, I said to him, hey, Blackfoot, which I grew up in, is a whole lot more process-oriented and so on. And I jokingly told him, hey, quit the real mode. Hey, just learn Blackfoot, In the Blackfoot mind, nothing is static. Everything is always on the move. And you can never predict what is going to happen. It's the whole notion that Heisenberg was talking about, the uncertainty principle, which David Bohm refers to as enfolded notions, implicate, hidden variables. All those things are similarities similar to, Blackfoot thought. Sometimes I think about David Bohm as an artist. Artists, for instance, are forever crossing boundaries, similar to poets. Poets don't always follow grammatical rules. Most scientists today are still hanging on to what they call the standard model. So I have to congratulate David Bohm for his scientific bravery. What David and I have done is to open up the discussion, which I find when I'm talking to young people that they're very interested in trying to proceed further with these ideas. In other words, some of them have actually got it, as I put it. They know in their basic feelings that this is an interesting way to go.
The lab at University College London is at the centre of experiments to prove the existence of the quantum potential.
If these experiments are successful, then this is really first substantive evidence that we have to assume the existence of something like the quantum potential which David Bohm postulated in his early theory. If the quantum potential exists in this way, then that really is the first evidence for the profound interconnectedness of the physical universe at a very deep fundamental level. Then we have to deal with the problem of how to reconcile this result of true non-locality of the universe with relativity theory that we talked about before. Because what it tells us is not that a quantum potential is a non-local energy system or non-local force system in the universe. It simply means that information can be non-locally distributed across the universe. That literally means that things can be informationally connected at one side of the universe to the other side of the universe.
With the quantum potential, you explain the qualities that gives you the interference without the need for introducing a wave function. And the wave function has been getting in the way, in my view. And we have this collapse problem, which has been going now for 50, 60, or 100 years. And it still has no solution. and maybe it has no solution because it is not relevant. We have got the thing wrong.
That would revolutionize our scientific worldview. So in that sense, it would validate those views of unification, those views that speak to the holism of the universe. And it truly would be a confirmation of a kind of holism that religions and spiritual systems and mystical systems have intuited for many, centuries and millennia even.
What I feel is that the universe is organic. With the organic, it's not the parts that determine the whole, it is the whole which determine the parts. So the wholeness plays a key role in it. And the way we talk about it is through process and not through particles and interaction.
Is it possible scientifically to define this wholeness?
Well, not really completely. Wholeness is an attitude or an approach, but it can be given a scientific realization, you see.
I think two levels, interdependency. Firstly, external things, different nations, different country, environment, and human being, other animals, everything interdependent. So now, according to that reality, we have to take care about the whole world and environment.
We are internally related to everything, not externally related. Consciousness is an internal relationship to the whole. We take in the whole and we act toward the whole. And that internal, whatever we have taken in, determines basically what we are.
When we're passing through some sort of forest, no bird, we feel something missing. When we're passing through some birds singing, some birds flying, then we feel more full. So that's now the reality. So interdependency on that level.
I read long ago that in some ancient saying that there were three basic attitudes or spirits, the scientific, the artistic, and the religious. And they had certain things in common and certain differences. Now, I think it's essential, one of the most essential points of the scientific spirit is to acknowledge the fact or the interpretation of the fact, whether you like it or not. You see, that is not to engage in wishful thinking or not to reject something because you don't like it. The religious spirit requires the same thing, that otherwise it will get lost in self-deception, as it is so easy to do.
Since my childhood, I have sort of interest about science. Now, modern science, investigation, everything investigate. So the ancient Indian sort of concept also used to come out of investigation. The same way, modern science also now investigate and experiment. The difference is, ancient Indians sort of those great thinkers, the only use mind or wisdom and sometimes meditation, no instrument. Now modern science use instrument.
Science is whatever people make of it. You see, science has changed over the ages, and it's different now from a few hundred years ago, and it could be different again. Now, there's no intrinsic reason why science must necessarily be measurement. This is another historical development which has come about over the past few centuries. It's entirely contingent and not absolutely necessary.
So all see same point. What's the reality?
If you expand on that, as David Bohm did in his life, he expanded on ideas, then you end up with the biggest picture of a completely unified, universal perspective that also integrates the observer with the observed, and it overcomes the illusion of separation between observer and observed. And you are recognizing that it's all one act of observing as things unfold. And I think this view inspired David Bohm.
David Bohm was one of the scientists who really showing interest about quantum physics. Nothing objectively exists. All they depend on observer. The reality, so far we know, is but still they're limitless. So reality, we have to sort of investigate. So David Bohm, I think really something like opener of our mind. So grateful.
The present ego identity is based, I think, on a wrong mode of thought, you see, in which a person identifies with his thoughts and with his body and with things, do you see? And which means that he's creating an illusion, right? That this self which people feel they have is only a show. It is not really there, but it is such a convincing show that everybody acts as if it were there, and that gives it an apparent reality.
So what does all this mean for you, for me, the universe, and everything? Bohm suggests that out of perceived emptiness, out of the so-called vacuum state, particles interact with, respond to, and are informed by an information potential which allows each particle to carry the necessary data for the cosmos to emerge, to be, through the flux and transformation of an activity of information.
So it's the information informing action of the quantum potential that makes it possible for the physical universe to be.
Everything we know and everything we will come to know is already in formation, waiting to unfold into manifest reality. It's the implicate waiting to become explicate.
Bohm's model of the implicate and explicate I think he's talking about how the subject-object split, duality, emerges from a ground which Lao Tzu would call the Tao, which is non-subject, non-object, but a unity, a wholeness.
Bohm proposes that everything is interconnected throughout the entire known universe. Everything is in a state of undivided wholeness. Each part of the universe contains the whole universe.
The ground beyond consciousness would be unmanifested. Now, if something is completely unmanifested, how do we ever know about it? But the unmanifested, David said, acts into the manifested. And the action is an appearance then in consciousness, and it implies the ground from which the result came.
This suggests that the nature of reality is infinite and non-local, meaning the reality we know and perceive through our sense perceptions unfolds from the deeper, non-local or implicate order.
I think Bohm was onto something there, and that there will be, beyond quantum theory, a new theory, and it may well be a theory of the implicate order, from which we'll see how quantum theory and the classical world emerges.
David Bohm rejected the orthodoxy that he hoped would embrace new ideas about the nature of reality. If we must learn anything from Bohm, it's that we must question everything.
In all the areas that he worked in, he was constantly pushing. In physics, in dialogue, in consciousness.
Mathematics needs to go beyond calculations, science beyond the limits of old formulae, philosophy beyond mind, religion beyond dogma. Can any one of them explain consciousness? It is consciousness that gives light its brightness, color its color, creates images in your mind that allows you to perceive the world. Without an explanation of consciousness, mathematics, science, and philosophy will continue to have a mysterious relationship to reality.
My feeling about this is that we understand so little about consciousness. And despite all the advances in neuroscience, and they've been amazing, the basic philosophical fact that you experience a self and a self-centered existence is something we're no closer to explaining or predicting than we've been at any time in the history of humanity.
People realize that we're hitting a brick wall unless we are engaging the problem of observation, of what the relationship is between the act of the observer and the observed. But we cannot address that question unless we ask the question, what is consciousness? Or even more, what is agency? What is the ability for human beings to act in the world? And observation is one aspect of it, but it sounds very passive, right? We're just observing what's already going on. But science is doing more, and human beings are doing way more than that. We are actually interacting with the world. We are changing the world to our needs.
If we aspire to go beyond our present state of consciousness, if we truly want to be happier, to love and know ourselves better, to regain meaning and wholeness, the old disciplines only serve to deepen the illusion of manifest reality. We must look beyond the veil of form to a realization of oneness, present in you, in me, the universe and everything. When you grasp this, it will put you on the threshold of what is real and your place in reality. Reality is wholeness, undivided wholeness, and this fact has yet to dawn on billions of people.
Bohm was a universal genius. He had a quality of genius in any direction that he directed his attention, and he directed his attention to everything, right? The whole was the thing, and so anything salient within the whole required attention. So.
Now the question is, how do our spiritual, political, and economic structures begin to adapt to this new reality? And I think that's where maybe everything that David Bohm experimented with and in comes to be very, very valuable.
He became a scientist, I believe, in order to benefit humanity. And I think that was all there throughout his life. And I think the discovery of interconnectedness through non-locality, he saw as a way to actually demonstrate that we are all one, to put it very simply. I think his mission was always to leading up to a transformation for human society, overcoming the fragmentation that we experience, towards having the experience of a new interconnectedness among us all to solve problems together. Overcoming the divisions. And so I think science inspired that initially, but clearly, based on the scientific insights, he tried to address all the different levels, from psychology to sociology to cultural studies, even bringing these ideas into the arts, and also into education with his work on dialogue. So in that sense, he represented a truly holistic, integrated vision of a human being. And I think as that, he can serve as a model for future generations.
Wholeness, I say, is a kind of attitude or an approach to the whole of life. If we can have a coherent approach to reality, then reality will respond coherently to us.
I think time come to investigate where is observer. I think worthwhile.